Hi everyone. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Johnny Sweeney. I'm a GP up in Donegal, and I'm also the National Project Manager of the GPIT Group. This webinar today, I'm going to talk about getting IT security right for your practice. Kind of based on an overview of the recent publication of IT security for general practice, which was released earlier this year. IT in general practice, we all know, is pretty important, and really the updated document was a follow-on from the 2008 document of No Data, No Business, which we published. Main things we want to kind of cover in this are the updates with regards to changes in internet security, mainly from hackers and ransomware, and have an awareness of communication systems that we're using within our practice and risks to our patients. Also, with the changes brought in GDPR, the IT security has become much more relevant. So starting off, I think it's a fair enough generalization to make that GPs and their IT systems generally don't mix very well. So instinctively, we kind of like to leave our computer network and systems to somebody else in the practice when we get down to business of seeing our patients. Because of that lack of care themselves or understanding, well, this is the very thing that leaves you open to attack. Because hackers are increasingly realizing that our notes, they're a valuable source of information just needed for identity theft. So increasingly hospitals and GP surgeries are getting attacked by hackers. So this document, well, it's designed to maximize the safety and productivity of your computer network. The purpose is to give a sort of 10-point checklist of the systems needed to be carried out and to provide an adaptable checklist that the practice can use, and also important to outline the important policies that are required within the practice to improve IT security. So the first thing we got to do is you got to appoint someone within the practice to act as the practice IT lead. It'd be wise to consider using the same person who already serves as the data officer, keeping your practice safe from GDPR issues. It's important they adhere to the 10-point checklist. That'll keep your system safer. This lead job, it's a managerial role. It's not specifically technological. They'll have to understand the policies that are required to keep the surgery safe and go over these policies with all staff. It's advisable that they consider doing an annual review of the checklist and consider quarterly checks on hardware and software issues, but always ensuring that daily backup of your data is maintained. It's important that they know who and when to call someone in the need of any technical support. It's wise to ensure the practice is aware of any outstanding security issues and report these at regular practice meetings. Consider developing a business continuity plan that will kick into operation if the computers go down for whatever reason. And also to develop practice protocols on how electronic information is shared with patients, either through emails or SMS text. So the next thing to consider are the policies and procedures that are needed to be employed within the practice. So there are sample policies obtainable in the appendix section of the document, with important policies to consider, and some of them even to have staff sign up on. One important one would be the practice internet and email policy. Another one would be the sharing of information to patients using email and SMS text. An overview of do's and don'ts for any new staff attending the practice is advisable. You should consider policy on passwords for computer terminals and practice management software, because sloppy password management can be a gateway to access to your system. Often you should also consider a practice backup policy, and if possible, your practice should invest in cloud backup and data recovery. So the next section to talk about is access control. The cornerstone of data security is only those allowed access or granted access to particular types of information. In general, there are 4 levels of access to consider. Number 1, the system administrator. They have access to the server network, and that would usually be the role of the IT support. Number 2, the practice manager. They have access to financial, clerical, and network systems. Number 3, the receptionists. They have patient administration access. Number 4, the clinical staff. They have access to the clinical programs, and they can be divided into the doctors, nurses, or any other allied health professionals. Everyone needs a password or some other unique authentication method. Passwords should be at least 8 characters long, with upper and lowercase letters, and with one or more symbols. Consider using passphrases rather than passwords, as they are more easily remembered and provide more security. Under the recent Data Sharing and Governance Act of 2019, you will need to have data sharing policies in place for all outside agencies that are accessing your data. Included in this would be your IT technicians, practice software companies, and HealthLink. Don't forget to get signed confidentiality agreements for any trainees, interns, or visiting medical students. Consider the staff that no longer work in your practice. Ensure their access is turned off after they leave. Consider getting your IT technician to set up audit logs through Windows Active Directory. This provides details on who is accessing, downloading, or changing information on your network. So now I'd like to drill down a little bit into the nuts and bolts, and really the next section is going to cover is about computer and network maintenance. It's worth having an understanding of how a network in its simplest form is developed. In that way, you can visualize when things go wrong what needs to be fixed. Computer maintenance, it's an essential role for the practice IT lead. It should be logged and dated regularly. There are both hardware and software tasks that need to be carried out periodically on all the stations. So what is a network? Well, in its simplest form, a computer network, it's an arrangement of intersecting computing devices and peripherals. And this interconnectivity allows all the devices to share or to have access to the same resources. This matrix is called a local area network. Setting up a small business computer network, it helps the business cut costs and increases workflow efficiency by allowing the workers to share common resources and devices, such as broadband, internet, printers, files, documents, and file storage resources. So in our hardware system, that consists of, we've got work cables, Cat 5, 6, 7 cables. They go into a patch panel, which connects all the cables together. They run through a network switch. That's routed, either wireless or generally wired in most practices, to the network server, which is the main computer. And from that, feed the workstations, which are the user PCs and laptops. You need to have surge protection in your network with an uninterruptible power source or battery backup. And then you have to have your software, which is usually made up of a combination of your operating system. For most practices, that's Microsoft Windows, your practice management software, and antiviral and malware software. So considerations to take with regards to hardware maintenance. When you're setting up your network, think about these workstations and servers, potentially they could be physically lifted and stolen. Your server is probably the most valuable piece of equipment. So if a server is kept in a potentially open room, maybe consider tethering it to the wall. If you store your server in a locked comms room, ensure the door remains locked and there's not direct sunlight, which could overheat the server. And with regards to software maintenance of the practice, it's important to understand that a lot of the malware out there targets the automatic updates that run in your operating systems and the antiviral software. So it's a good practice to periodically go through all the terminals in the practice, ensuring that the Windows updates are running automatically. Ensure that those updates are always left on. Consequently, it's vital that practices that are running old operating systems such as XP or Windows 7, because those systems are not getting future updates from Windows, they're more prone to attack from malware. Finally, when you're checking your updates, it's good to check that the antiviral software is automatically updating and sweeping your data. Again, because the malware will target that and turn it off initially. Another concept to consider regarding practice network security is screen confidentiality. It's vital that computer screens aren't visible to unwanted eyes, either beside a window or in the shared reception area. It's important that you ensure that screensavers activate shortly after someone leaves the station. You should consider maybe putting a password to protect the screensaver. So the next section I'd like to go over with you would be the network controls. Now the network perimeter controls, that's the hardware and software tools that are used to protect the network. These systems analyze the data flow. They're often referred to as firewalls or intrusion detection system. So there needs to be a balance in security and obtaining outside connection for a practice to function, especially if you use remote access. So if your practice system allows external network linking, like a peripheral surgery laptop, then you will need to incorporate extra protection, such as a virtual private network or VPN. And for any computer networks, it's also advisable to invest in a hardware firewall and have it configured so only authorized information is permissible to enter and leave the practice. Consider investing in a software intrusion detection system or an IDS. The IDS will create an alert when there's been unauthorized access to the network, which allows necessary action to be taken. You should also consider that antiviral software should be part of the network controls and should be installed and operating on all machines. So I'd like to bring on a really important section here with regards to your IT security. That's the whole concept of malware and viruses. Well, malware is a type of software program that's created by hackers, which when it's activated, it will search for private information or it can corrupt your data. Malware viruses are generally introduced to the network through the internet, and especially via emails. They can also be transmitted through media like USB flash drives and CDs. Care should be taken when opening any attachments, even those from trusted senders. It would be advisable not to click any hyperlink from pop-ups recommending an update to a specific program. If you're unsure, hover your mouse over a hyperlink. Then you can view the URL or the website destination of the site. If it looks reputable, you can click it. If not, stay away from it. So malware takes on many different forms. Viruses and worms, they're codes that attach to files and spread from one computer to another. Trojans, that's malware disguised as a real program. Phishing, that's where fake emails are used or websites attempt to get username, password and credit card details. Spam, that's the unwanted junk email we all get. Spyware, adware, they're advertising supported tracking software. They can collect keyboard strokes, which can help obtain passwords and get the details of any sites visited on the internet. And the most dangerous is ransomware. This type of virus corrupts files, making them unusable, and then demands a ransom to reverse its effects. Common advice is don't pay the ransom, as it can give further access to the hacker, where he can corrupt even more of your files. The threat of malware can be limited by investing in appropriate antiviral software, remembering that it's not safe to use free antiviral software for your practice data. Practice processes around the use of the internet and email, they're critical, as it's through human action that many of these malicious programs get activated. Consider limiting access to the practice email to 1 or 2 individuals who are trained to recognize suspicious emails. Also, because spyware can be tracking keystrokes and collecting passwords, it's wise to update your passwords frequently. It would be sensible for the practice IT lead to log checks on all terminals to ensure that the antiviral software is installed and running. Make sure that automatic updates and scans are turned on. Keep in mind that a lot of malware will try to turn off the automatic antiviral uploads and sweeps. The most common method for hackers to get into a computer network is by getting a user to open email attachments. They might be disguised as harmless, commonly used documents like iTunes receipts. And when the attachment is opened, it may look like a genuine receipt, usually something for a free app, which you don't assume to be any sort of a threat. But when the receipt is opened, a malicious program will start to run in the background, which gives the hacker remote access to the computer and the network. The same process can take place if unexpected pop-ups are opened when you're web browsing. The pop-ups will tempt the user to open them with familiar desired upgrades like Adobe Reader. Check these pop-ups for authenticity before clicking to open. Ransomware attacks are a specific type of internet virus. When they affect a computer network, they will corrupt the data files, making them unusable. The ransom comes into play when trying to open a file. The user is led to a release page where the hacker will offer to release the files for a fee. The most famous ransomware attack was aptly named WannaCry, which affected computers worldwide in May 2017. So when a ransomware email is opened and the virus is activated, the network can become infected. This mightn't be apparent for a couple of days after the attack. During this incubation period, the virus can replicate itself and infect more computers on the network before detonating. For example, the ransomware virus WannaCry specifically locked, renamed, and password protected all the Microsoft Office files on the affected system. Even though paying the fee is a reasonable response to release the files and get up and running again, it's worth noting that much more damage can be done to the network by paying the ransom. This can inadvertently give the hackers access to all the computer files, which would potentially allow them to encrypt more of the network, and invariably a higher ransom for release will be demanded. The message is simple: don't pay the kidnappers. If there's good backup, both in-house and online, that can identify when and where the virus initially entered the system, if the practice is unfortunate enough to become infected. Having rigid security allows backing up the system to a moment in time prior to the infection point, and allow for destroying or wiping of the hard drive of the initially infected machine. It should be noted that data breaches like ransomware attacks must be reported to the data commissioner within 72 hours of infection, or the practice could face fines under GDPR, as well as a review of practice systems by the data commissioner. If this risk has not been considered up to now, it's worth the time and effort to take all the steps needed, as the consequence of a ransomware attack can be catastrophic for the business. Another concept to consider in your IT security is the use of portable devices and remote access security. So mobile devices, they include laptops, USB flash drives, removable hard disks, smartphones, and backup tapes. All these hardware devices have an increased risk of getting lost or stolen, and because of this, they require increased security consideration. Storage of backup tapes, both on and off-site, should be in a locked device. Bear in mind, fireproof cases will not prevent backup tapes from melting. All of these backups have patient data on them, so the storage of tapes must be secure. For all portable devices, ensure proper password protection and consider encryption technology. Remote wireless access to the network may be beneficial for peripheral surgeries or house calls, but this increases the chance of unsolicited hacking into the practice data. If remote access is to be used in a practice management system, it's worth getting technical advice on how best to protect the network. It would be advisable to consider installing virtual private networks for this functionality. Many surgeries run wireless internet, and some even advertise free Wi-Fi for patients in the waiting room. If the wireless system runs on the same network as the practice management software, this data could be open to attack. If the practice wants to offer patients or staff free Wi-Fi, then a separate network may need to coexist alongside the practice management system. It may also be advisable to configure the wireless network in such a way that it would be difficult for someone to access it. Change the SSID, that's how the network appears on a device, so it's not recognizable as belonging to a health center, and ensure that the default modem passwords are changed at setup. Ensure the modem connection protocol is set to WPA2, which is Wi-Fi Protected Access 2, rather than the older, less secure WEP or Wired Equivalent Privacy. This may need the assistance of the hardware provider or appropriate technician to achieve. If any outside parties legitimately access the practice network through remote access, then there will need to be security arrangements in place. This would involve the practice IT technician, any GP software companies, and HealthLink. Consider the risks when any files are taken home to be worked on in the evenings and eventually returned to the network. Ensure the files are not carrying malware before being loaded back into the practice. In the last few years, there's been increased use of smart devices for gathering health data, from implantable glucose monitoring devices for diabetic patients to smartwatches collecting ECG data. Bear in mind that these devices have their own security limitations. These can be hacked, and they can be the cause of computer virus infection. In the future, more of this data will be brought into the patient's medical notes, which could increase the malware risk. Also, take into consideration that some of these devices may store patient data outside of the EU, which will require separate security considerations. There's increasing acceptance that more and more patient information is being shared by electronic means. As too, more outside communication is occurring electronically by email and social media. It's important that we as GPs understand that there's a significant difference in the security with transferring health messages versus using email and social media. Health messages are at the moment in Ireland being shared using HL7 version 2.4 messages. This is a secure method of communication because the message is coded and can only be deciphered on terminals which host a digital signature. HL7 itself has evolved from version 2 messages to better interoperable systems, such as Clinical Document Architecture, or CDA, and the newer HL7 application program interface called FHIR, which is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, which will form the building blocks for a single electronic healthcare record for all patients, which is what most countries aspire to as the grail for electronic health data. Practices that are transferring sensitive patient information should use HealthMail wherever possible and never use standard email to transfer patient information, unless that patient information is encrypted or with explicit and informed patient consent. HealthMail, because it only allows information to be shared across healthcare users or people in the HSE, it's not a practical email system to use in the practice. Communicate with agencies outside health service. I talk about a real cornerstone of your computer network is your backup systems. I know there are different systems in place and practices around the country. But when you're thinking about your backup, the first thing you got to consider is how much historical data can you afford to lose, and how far can that data go back in order for your practice to continue functioning as a business. In this day and age, I would, if possible, I'd advise practices to use both hardware, such as tape system. Some people use a portable hard drive. But more importantly, if you can, get a cloud backup system, because cloud backup also offers the option of data recovery. And this is very important if your practice happens to be hit by any type of malware. I've gone around some practices and there's different methods in place on how they run their backups, especially with tape backups. A lot of practices run 5 tapes, one for each day of the working week. That's dangerous because a lot of malware, it can take, in some cases, even a couple of weeks for the malware to detonate. By which stage, if you're only using 5 tapes to back up your software, well then, all your 5 tapes are going to be infected. So if you're going to use a tape-only system, I would recommend use multiple tapes and consider taking a tape out of the circulation once a week and maybe once a month. Even consider keeping 1 or 2 tapes off site in case the whole practice happens to be destroyed. With your backup tapes, it's advisable to consider getting your IT technician to check that the backups are actually running onto the tapes, because it's very hard to identify the information on the tapes themselves. And another important thing to consider is for practice management files, so that might include accountancy files, it's a good idea to back up any important files that the practice manager uses, get them onto the server as well. Now you'll be glad to hear we're coming to the last section, which is about disaster recovery. And this section describes the procedures that when there are disruptions to the computer system, those disruptions could be internal, could be localized to one computer, or involve the whole network, or they may involve outside surgery things such as power supply, or disaster like fire and flood. It's important that the practice considers developing a plan as to what to do whenever there's a complete disaster to their computer systems. We've all come to rely on our computers so much more in the last few years, so we have to think ahead of the game and look at what steps we need to take when our computers go down. So it's a good time to maybe have a meeting about developing a practice plan that will outline the steps that you'll need to do in order to get your business back operating as efficiently and as quickly as possible. I think these pictures kind of speak for themselves and sharpens the mind on the importance of preparing yourself as much as possible for any disaster that could hit your practice. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today, and I know it's a hard subject to get through. It's an even harder one to try and get across. But if we can adhere to this 10-point strategy to managing our IT security, we can keep ourselves in a better place. And don't forget, no data equals no business. Thank you. Goodbye.